I think that's another major takeaway. It's like you never know where your art could possibly take you. You never know where the art that you put out in the world, how much good it can do.
You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For 50 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Derek Fassbender.
Welcome, listeners. I'm Derek Fassbender, host of the B&H Photography Podcast.
And I'm Jill Waterman, the podcast's senior creative producer.
And I'm Mike Weinstein, the show's technical producer and audio engineer.
Now, we've all heard the saying, the best camera is the one that's with you. But do you know how this catchphrase ended up as part of the current vernacular and all the circumstances behind its emergence as a mantra of the mobile economy? If not, you're about to find out in today's show. The best camera is a throwback to the beginnings of the app revolution and the pervasive photo sharing trend that we know and love today. Before there was Instagram, there was an enterprising photographer who longed for an easier way to share his iPhone photos with his growing online community. He hired some developers to build an app, and both its viral spread and the resulting media frenzy were beyond everyone's wildest dreams. There was only one problem. Some fundamental issues in the contract and differences over vision led the developers to slow updates, ultimately resulting in the app's demise. But the story doesn't end there. The initial success and ultimate failure of the best camera app is only a single beat in the extraordinary career that spans photography, filmmaking, education, entrepreneurship, innovation, and boundless wisdom about living a creative life. We have a lot of ground to cover in today's show, so without further ado, let's dive in and introduce our illustrious guest. Chase Jarvis is an award-winning artist, entrepreneur, best-selling author, and one of the most influential photographers of the past 20 years. Internationally renowned for his high-octane action sports and active lifestyle imagery, Chase's expansive body of work ranges from advertising campaigns for companies like Apple, Nike, and Red Bull, to work with athletes like Serena Williams and Tony Hawk, to collaborations with renowned icons like Lady Gaga and Sir Richard Branson. As a fine artist, his photos have been featured in solo and group exhibitions with an international scope. An early adopter of social media, in 2009, Chase created the Best Camera app, the first photo app to share images to social networks. In 2010, he co-founded and helmed the online education platform Creative Live, offering millions of students the opportunity to learn creative and business skills from the world's top creators and entrepreneurs. A keynote speaker on 6 continents, Chase has advised Fortune 100 brands and has been a guest at distinguished locales from the Obama White House to Buckingham Palace, to name just 2. Chase lives with his wife Kate and their dog Bodie in Seattle, Washington, where he currently hosts the wildly successful Chase Jarvis Live podcast, which has garnered more than 50 million downloads, as well as serving as a volunteer board director for several nonprofits. Chase Jarvis, welcome to the show.
Thank you all for the lovely intro. I'm going to record that and play it for myself when I feel bad occasionally. Thanks, y'all.
That's a great use for it. No, it's great to have you on. And it's funny, you know, you have done so much for the digital space, but like many great photographers, you started out cutting your teeth back in the film era. So I want to start there. You're primarily self-taught. What was your method? You know, everybody has their own way of learning. You're trying to figure photography out. It's not one of these things that is easy to grasp some of the concepts. So being that you did take the educational space on later in your career, when you were first getting started learning film, what was your approach to teaching yourself?
Wow. Let's see. My interest in photography stemmed from being on the other side of the camera as an athlete. I was a multi-sport athlete in high school, went to college on a soccer scholarship, and we were one of the top schools in the country, Division I soccer. And I was like reminded occasionally, you know, when I would appear in the media, or I was aware when, you know, a specific moment happened and some photographer that would have been documenting the day, you know, whether it was football or soccer or skateboarding or any of these other activities that I spent a lot of time in, I became absolutely smitten with the moment. that peak action that Cartier-Bresson would familiarize us with, that was always something that I realized was very special. And let's just say, fast forward from my original awareness of that, and my grandfather, bless his heart, dropped dead of a heart attack just a week or so before my college graduation. And one of the downstream effects of that was that I was given his cameras. Now, he was one of those folks that B&H love, right? He bought everything, all the new cool stuff, and he was always experimenting, and just a passionate amateur. And as the recipient of his camera after his passing, I had a lot of respect and appreciation for my grandfather, and I was heartbroken when he passed. And there was something in me that connected the dots between the gift of his camera and this life of participating in sports and being obsessed with seeing the magic moment captured by other photographers. So I did what any other college graduate who had a little bit of money in their pocket and a new camera might do. I set out to walk about the earth and lived out of a backpack for 6 months with my then girlfriend and now wife, Kate, and started taking pictures. And to remind everyone how painful film was, I remember taking a photograph in the middle of nowhere and writing down every single exposure, like f8, 250th, with certain ISO film, and then skipping dinner occasionally to be able to afford to have my film processed somewhere in Europe as we were backpacking around. And then I would compare the recording of my exposure to the results of the picture and what were the conditions. And it was incredibly painful. Yeah, I mean, it was like, that's how painful and expensive it was. Film cost $20 and it was $20 to develop it. And that was more than I had allotted for a couple of days accommodations and food. So I was literally choosing between sleeping on the streets and learning about photography. Bump forward just a little bit longer, I came back and from traveling and didn't want to get a real job. I was obsessed with photography at this point and moved to a beautiful place called Steamboat Springs, Colorado, mostly because my family knew someone that owned a restaurant there and I could get a job tending bar while I experimented with photography and skied 100 days a year. And it was in that moment where I built the bathroom darkroom and was shortly frustrated by that. I could develop the film, but I couldn't print in there. And this is chronicled in my book, Creative Calling. So just to be clear, I'm not breaking any news here, but speaking of breaking, I actually had a friend who was taking community college classes, and he propped the window open, and I would, in the middle of the night at 2 a.m., crawl into the local community college darkroom, develop my film, print, make lots and lots of mistakes. I'd go there at 1 a.m. and leave at 5 a.m. before anybody got there. And I have since, so we're clear, I have made an anonymous donation to that particular community college to repay all of the chemistry that I used and the breaking and entering. Fortunately, the law has escaped me since then. So it was a long and very painful process to teach myself photography, and I wouldn't have had it any other way.
Wow. If everyone could just pause now and just the part of taking field notes, that's it. I'm done. We could stop the interview now. I try to tell everyone, take field notes. It's the easiest way to learn film. No one listens.
Yeah, it's a very painful process. And connecting the dots is what's difficult, right? We're so conditioned to immediate response. And now the fact we can take a picture and look at it 1 second later in all its glory and see how we can improve, like that really dramatically simplifies and shortens the learning curve. And to not have that was both helpful in that you really had to pay attention and it mattered. And, I don't miss those days specifically because of the learning curve. I love the look of film and I still have a sweet spot in my heart for it. But there is something beautiful about learning in a very sort of esoteric, outdated way that develops a huge appreciation for the process.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the process in and of itself is romantic when you really take the time and the effort and the care that goes into perfecting it. Now, were you interested in photography to the point beyond just taking photos? Was there anyone that inspired you in your early years?
There was none of the masters. I was genuinely inspired by my grandfather, who I always found tinkering. And I loved the fact that it seemed like an infinite experience, sort of like fly fishing or learning a language. Like the more you learn, the more you really realize that you have more to learn. and that pursuit, the pursuit of knowledge for knowledge's sake, and that was always very intriguing to me. So between my grandfather and specifically my father, he stood on the sidelines of all my football and soccer games and skate park experiences and was shooting photos that I watched, again, the work that he would put in, the resulting moments that were captured, how it made me feel about whether it was myself or my friends. And then my dad would print all these images and share them with the team at the end of the season, whether this was football or soccer. And that gift exchange, the ability to help someone see themselves captured in film, it was just a really beautiful, albeit romantic, sort of cycle that I got to observe and be a part of. And that certainly inspired me.
That's awesome. It's like this organic passion for the art.
And I did, when I went back to Steamboat Springs, Colorado, and I taught myself through breaking into the local darkroom there, the other, I guess, parallel experience I was having was literally going to the library and looking through the card catalog for books about processing film and about technique. And it was there that I started reading about the masters, their journeys, a lot of biographies. And certainly that inspired me. But if I'm being truly heartfelt about this, it wasn't like I saw amazing photography on the wall. It was that I saw it firsthand, and I was on the receiving end of seeing pictures of my friends and myself that made me very curious.
So it wasn't like, most people.
Yeah, I didn't see Edward Weston prints and oh my God, that's amazing.
National Geographic books or subscription.
It wasn't that at all. It was so strange. It was very, I guess, localized and simple. And I do believe that I used that early on, this sort of blue collar mentality about teaching myself the core concepts and experimentation as my vehicle for learning. And that ended up playing out in all sorts of different ways in my life. It was more that than the highfalutin chemistry or the magic of the technology or seeing some master at work. It was really a blue collar curiosity. And looking backwards, as I guess that's the only way you can connect the dots. I'm proud of that.
So, Chase, because you weren't exposed to that sort of high-end canon of photography and all the formal rules, how much of your early work broke the rules because you didn't know any better? And did that contribute to what then became your style for, crazy action pictures?
I love the question, Jill, and I feel like I was more obsessed with learning the rules prior to being able to break them. I was aware of what a bad photograph was.
Okay.
Technically speaking, not peak action, not sharp focus, not appropriate depth of field that helps you tell the story. The active intention, I was aware of that. And I was aware when, making the field notes, I love that hat tip there, that if I set out to take a picture of a thing and it failed, I would usually deconstruct why it failed, whether that was technical or lack of ability to tell the story, or use the different elements in photography in order to tell that story. So it was more an obsession with the fundamentals than anything else. And by fundamentals, I mean really simple stuff. And based on my background as an athlete, I became obsessed with specifically focusing on sports and action. And I really, early on, it was a documentation of the experiences that I was having doing this stuff with many of my friends who are the best ski and snowboarders in the world. For example, I really started cutting my teeth when we moved to Steamboat, Colorado. And the ability to focus the camera on the things that you know a lot about. I mean, I was spending hundreds of days a year outside in the mountains around many of the best athletes in the world. And I had to operate at a very high level athletically to be able to go to those places and do the same things and ski to the same places that were in all the magazines and the movies. I think it was the combination of a passion for the fundamentals, plus being just aware enough. To be clear, I'm just always barely figuring this out, right in the nick of time. I don't want to pretend like I had it all figured out, because there was, thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours just down the drain and making mistakes and whatnot. But I really was aware that when I trained my eye on the things that I was good at and knew something special about it, had a point of view, that's when my images started being recognized by other people in the industry, or where I got breaks and things like that, because I was good at the fundamentals and I was pointing the camera at a thing that I was disproportionately wise about relative to the rest of the world because I was living that lifestyle as well. It was as if I was documenting something I knew so much about. And that really, really helped. It wasn't like I was out there chasing some, again, esoteric expression of photography or trying to be somebody else. The fact that I was, taking pictures of skating and surfing and snowboarding and things that I knew a lot about, that gave me a lever that I didn't value as much at the time. But looking back now, like having a unique point of view, knowing a lot about the thing you're photographing to be able to capture the right moment, for example, with the right people in the right location, that was just this big sort of alchemy, the soup that came together to really help my work stand out and help my career for sure.
Hmm. And being as versed as you are, I mean, you've done a lot. You're not just a photographer. You have the entrepreneurial spirit in you. Was that always in you? And at what point was it kind of like, okay, maybe I don't want to be just a photographer, or maybe I want to do more with my photography? When did that part?
Well, I feel like I've always been way out of fashion. Honestly, like I was a kid. My first film I screened this summer between first and second grade.
Wow.
Yeah, we washed cars to be able to afford 6 minutes of Super 8 film. We rented a camera for $1 from a neighborhood cinematographer. We hired a friend of mine's brother. We wrote a script. We edited it in camera. Of course, you'd like record a scene and then stop and record a scene and then stop. Paid for it, had it developed, screened it in David Trolson's downstairs to a sold out show. And actually, my first film was profitable. So
Wow.
that gives you a little bit of the young Chase brain.
How much did you take in?
Oh, it was probably like, it was a ton. It was like $6 probably, $8. I mean, enough to go buy 8 candy bars and have a little left over. But it was that certainly early entrepreneur. I had a comic strip that I sold in elementary school that was the same price as milk. So you could either buy milk to accompany your dinner or you could buy my
Oh my God.
comic strip that my mom had a copier at work. So I would draw the comic strip. She would take it to work and copy it. And then I would distribute the people who were willing to pay me the 6 cents or whatever that it cost. So very entrepreneurial early on. Ironically, that was talked out of me by my second grade teacher. She said, enough of this filmmaking. And I had a stand-up comedy routine and that comic strip. And she said, you need to stick to sports because there's no room for kids having businesses in second grade and all this creative stuff is for the birds. So why don't you just get good grades and be an athlete? And I mean, she wasn't wrong. I was a good athlete. And yet she really squashed that creative spirit. I'll never forget it was Miss Kelly, and she told my parents and me, this parent-teacher-student conference, that I should give up on all this creative stuff and focus on my studies. And it worked. Yet there was always something in me later in life when that was that curiosity to return back to photography or to creativity that I had basically shut down for so long. So always an early entrepreneur, yet when I actually managed to start making a living as a photographer. It was reasonably controversial because I never assisted for another photographer in my life. The first day rate I was paid was $2,000, which was more than I had made the year before working in a restaurant. I had essentially fumbled my way into making the early semblances of a living. And that was controversial in itself, right? There was only one way to come up when I was coming up, and that was to work for someone who had been, a lot further along in the process than you had been. And that I didn't do it was very strange. I think it was a combination of basically having a legit eye that I had honed on, trained on things that I was good at, and then working in that action sports space in ski shops and whatnot, and having people recognize that work. My first breakthroughs were commercial. People say, that's really cool. I'm going to buy that and put it in a magazine or license it from you. And I think my first sale was $500 in a pair of skis. And that went on to be an ad in a ski magazine. And I was like, wow, I had so much fun doing that. And if I could do that again, it's so much easier. I mean, that's how much I made last month tending bar or whatever. So there was a hunger, but it was always against the grain. That was very unheard of. And then, for example, in the editorial world, I was like, oh, wow, I'm making an actual living. I should probably get my stuff in the magazines. Editors were like, where have you come up? This is like mature work. We've never even seen or heard of you. So that was also very strange to just show up on the scene without anybody knowing anything about the work, but having essentially a mature body of work and have been a commercially successful by basic standards. It was just very strange. And then fast forward, the last bit of your question is like this transformation photographer to sort of photographer entrepreneur. You do anything for a long time and you get good at it if you're passionate about it. And I cared more than anything in the world besides my wife that it would be about my photography and photography career. And I started seeing that little unique spark that we all have inside of us. When we bring that to our work, not dissimilar to taking pictures of things you know a lot about and bringing that sort of entrepreneur that was buried in me as a young kid to bear on the market. And things like sponsorships. There was no such thing as photography sponsorships. No one got free gear. No one was paid. Didn't exist. And I was operating in action sports where the best skiers were, quote, sponsored, and they would get free equipment and, get flown to competitions and stuff. And I started telling the people that I was photographing that you need to give me this camera and you need to pay for me to go do this stuff. And if you're going to feature my work, you have to pay me well to do it. And there was a huge pushback, like, you're crazy, dude. And I would, at photography trade shows, like, how much did this person make for appearing in your magazine? They're like, how much did they make? Oh, it's a privilege for them to be featured in a fill in the blank, insert popular brand. And to me, that was wrong. And so that was another sort of thing I just railroaded through. And that was, I think, this combination of entrepreneur and artist, which now is obvious, but then it was very taboo. So it was always kind of cutting against the grain.
Yeah, especially to have, artists, we don't normally have the best business sense and we are notoriously self-doubters.
Yeah.
So to have that sense of value in your own work to say, look, I command this amount. How much are you paying me?
Yeah, it sounds cool now, but I tell you, it was really an acerbic sort of universe to try and operate in. And I sort of took that personally. And I think the chip on my shoulder, certainly I didn't go to the prestigious photo schools, and I did find it sweet when they started asking me to speak there, having not attended, and I made that point from the stage. And I feel like looking backwards, you can't stand out and fit in at the same time. And we have this belief that it's awkward to show up in a way that you want to show up and to become popular or have your work be recognized such that you can make a living and a life out of that and blend in with your peers. They don't actually all go together. So getting comfortable being uncomfortable and getting used to people not understanding, what as Jeff Bezos said, any entrepreneur has to be comfortable being misunderstood for long periods of time. And I do find that to be a really strong attribute looking backwards for why I was able to cultivate the success that I've had.
Now, were you actively trying to develop a style? Obviously you said people took to your work.
Yeah.
And to have your work used commercially that early on in your career, that means you're doing something right. But were you conscious that, hey, I have a style, or was it still you trying to find yourself?
To me, this is the thing. If you're going to have one takeaway from this show today, it's that is the thing that people buy. They buy responsible, creative expression. They buy the ability to do what you say you're going to do, to get the shot regardless, no excuses. And those are just sort of get in the door fee. Like, that's what it means to be a professional, to produce on demand. Everything beyond that is about what you bring to the image, you personally, your life experiences, your unique style. If you are really where you should be with your photography, people who don't know your work but have seen it before would be able to say, that looks like a fill in the blank, your name. Whether it's a picture of a car or a bride or a portrait, or, it's like this unique set of experiences that you've lived in this life. How can you put that in your backpack and bring that to work every day? That's what people pay for. And what most photographers don't realize is that, again, I'm looking backwards and saying, so some of my successful years, you'd make millions of dollars. And you realize I had 20 clients that year, 25 clients. There's 7.5 billion people on the planet. You need 20 to make millions of dollars. That's bananas, right? So this idea that we have to be what everybody else wants or what's the trend right now versus sort of leaning into who you are, doing that authentically, despite the fact that it might not be in vogue or fashionable or whatever looks and feels good to you. And to have the market goes all over the place. If you're chasing the market, you're hosed because you'll never catch it. And if you stick to your own personal style and the market ebbs and flows and your work comes in and out of style, but you are true to you, there's always going to be 20 people in the world who are more than happy to give you the money to create the vision that you see and help them bring their product or experience to life. So I just knew that enough. Like 51% believed in that, 49% terrified and doubtful. But that's all you need is like 1% more. And I ran to that and I found that, wow, that's really what people pay for. And the only way you can do that is repetition.
Well, it also doesn't hurt that we have this incredible digital economy nowadays where people can really slot in to these really specific niches.
So true.
So as eccentric as you think you are, fear not, there's millions of people out there who are going to respond positively to your specific vision.
Quite literally 1 million people, right? Yeah, and you see that all over. There's internet communities for the craziest stuff, right? Again, this is my hope that people take away. Like my friend, artist James Victori, what made you weird as a kid is the thing that's going to make you great as an artist today. And so what are those things? And to me, that combination of being insatiably curious about creativity and about photography and having that entrepreneurial spirit, like that was my weird alchemy. Growing up playing sports, being outside, skin knees and skateboards and chipped tooth and all that stuff. And that's the story that I told. And that's the only way that my work stood out from other people who were trying to capture that work because it was trendy or because it was catching on. Action sports was becoming a thing. So I found myself competing with really high-end, New York-based photographers when I was living in a tiny one-bedroom in Steamboat Springs, Colorado.
So let's dive into the aspect of building community. And as you were getting very successful, you were sharing your work and digital was coming along and the iPhone came out and you were shooting pictures and sharing them. And you came up with this idea for the best camera app. And you decided, I'm going to follow that and hire some developers to build the app. What went into that process?
There's so much packed into the backpack of life that we carry into any situation. The stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, the stories that we hear from others about ourselves and about the world. And I feel like I had had enough success commercially and was realizing that, again, this sort of storytelling and this entrepreneurial side of me, again, it sounds so crazy. It is so true that no one in the world was telling stories. There's no such thing as behind the scenes. The term did not exist. It was 2004, and I had a video intern I hired to tell stories about me, essentially about learning in real time and experimenting and failing. And it was totally revolutionary. And the reason I was doing that is because I was looking for other people who were also curious and experimenting. And I thought, wow, if I'm doing this and could share what I learned on the internet. Also, there was a part of me, the business part of me, that realized that information was going to be increasingly free and that it was going to move faster and faster. And it was super controversial for me to stand on stages at places like Photo Plus and whatnot in the early 2000 aughts and say, the secret lighting technique that you think is defining your work is trash. Everyone's about to know that. So you really need to start coming to terms with this. And it's not about the things that you thought it was. It's in something entirely different. And so as I sought to make that, my special sauce, I was just turning everything inside out. And it was totally radical. And I think, honestly, if I look back, that undeniably was the thing that separated me from my peers. And, one of the reasons that I'm on the podcast here, whatever.
What is it that you're emphasizing there?
It was the sharing. When no one else was sharing, I started sharing and it was radical. People were like, oh my gosh, this guy's just like me.
Right.
He's curious and makes mistakes and he's not afraid to show he's making mistakes. And he's carrying this video intern around with him and putting videos on the internet. It was before social media. I mean, YouTube didn't exist. It was called Google Video, and there was Vidler, all these 2004, 2005. Yeah, it's crazy, but I loved it. It received, of course, tons of hate mail, and I developed a very thick skin. And also early on, I was like, wow, there are people who are actually hungry for this stuff. I remember, I think it was 2009. there was a piece of software that came out. It was called Ustream, and it was an app that was designed for military families to be able to connect with their spouse overseas. It's one of the first apps that did that. And I reached out and introduced myself to the founder. We're still friends to this day. And I said, hey, I'm interested. Do you think instead of the camera looking at me, can it look at whatever I'm looking at and just broadcast? She's like, yeah, I don't know. Do whatever, figure it out. And I remember doing that and broadcasting a live photo shoot. I was shooting an album cover for a punk band, and 25,000 people tuned in to watch me do that.
Wow.
And I was like,
that's a big insight right there.
Yeah. And I was like, whoa. And I was interacting with them in a very lightweight ways. It was very rudimentary. There was a webcam. It was super low res. And that did really help me understand that, this is where this is going. So I'd been shooting videos and posting them on the internet since about 2004, 5. And this was in 2009. So it'd been 4 years of posting videos. And, that built a very large social following long before it was sort of trendy or interesting. It was like, oh my gosh, I ask a question on the internet and 1,000 people respond in real time, because there wasn't a lot of other options then. So that was really interesting. The first time we live streamed something, that was really interesting. And I basically just cobbled all that together.
So Chase, how confident were you that this is something that I'm just really curious about?
Sure.
Because it's determined, I think, a lot of ways the internet has shaped out this nature that everything is, quote, free, unquote, in terms of uploading and sharing stuff. Mm-hmm. But there's another currency that's being paid out in terms of your data, and that's the way social networks, were able to monetize, and they still are run that way.
Yeah.
So were you pretty confident that this was going to happen that way, as opposed to the alternative way, which would be a subscription-based model?
Yeah, I didn't think that it would be used for nefarious.
Right, not nefarious necessarily, but, there's a trade-off, right?
For sure. And I was aware that resistance I got a lot of for being a digital photographer. And I cut my teeth with film. We started the show there, right? I know enough about film to be dangerous. And I printed all my own prints. And those are what got essentially a for sale. They licensed a print and scanned the print to put it into a magazine. So I was printing my own commercially successful imagery and still realized that, oh my gosh, I can learn so much faster if I can take a picture, especially with a bunch of sophisticated lighting, and see that lighting in real time and make adjustments. That's going to make me deadly in the best way on a commercial set, because I can, instead of spending all day shooting Polaroids and trying to find the one perfect shot, I can learn and innovate in real time with the client looking over my shoulder. And they've never seen anything like it. So it was a massive differentiator. Now, specific to your question, I felt like I knew just enough and I could see around the corner. This is the job of the entrepreneur, right? To see around the corner. I could just see it around the corner enough to know that this is where the world was going. And the same was true with mobile photography. To Jill's question, I had the first possible $100,000 digital back, several of those, and 25 cameras and 10 pro photo setups. And when the iPhone came out, I started taking pictures and said, wow, this is cool. And people absolutely tried to ruin me for that. The fact that I thought that was somehow interesting. And the thing that I thought that was interesting, to be clear, not the 0.3 megapixel picture on my Razr phone, whatever. Not that was good, that I could see that was going to be good quickly. And the most important part was my $100,000 Hasselblad was at my studio, locked in a vault. And I was on the go, traveling somewhere. And that's where the phrase, the best camera is the one that's with you, just resonated at such a deep personal level that I was suddenly able to be a photographer at a moment's notice with no pretense. So I knew just enough to see where technology was going. I personally enjoyed it deeply. But again, it was absolutely controversial to have a successful commercial photographer who had access to all this gear advocating for a camera that everyone else had access to.
It's such an interesting dynamic. I mean, of course, looking at it retroactively, it's like, of course it makes sense now, but yeah, back then it's like, what are you, crazy?
I mean, I was on like the morning shows and saying, people don't realize this, but you're going to take a picture of where you parked your car at the airport so you don't forget the stall number. And people were like, I don't even know what you're saying right now, kid. This is goofy. This is bananas. Like, why would we take a picture of that? It's just infinitely useful. And photography, to be really clear, is a universal language. There's 7,106 languages. And if I wanted to say, I love you, will you marry me? I'm sorry. In even 20 of these languages, it would take me forever to figure that out. And I would probably be quite bad at it. And yet, if I show anybody who's listening to this show a photograph of a mother holding a child, everybody gets it immediately. It is the universal language. And so having that early understanding of what was happening and deciding that I was going to master this universal language was like a catapult for me culturally, creatively, and frankly, it's the thing that transformed my life for sure.
Now, full disclosure, I probably have about 400 pictures in my camera roll of my car parked.
I did it yesterday coming back from Park City, just so we're clear.
Level 6, row D. It's like every vacation, it's a must.
Yep.
I'm interested in, because clearly, I mean, you're super intelligent. You think ahead. And when thinking of coming up with an app, developing this idea, it makes sense. But then there's the developing side of things. And it's, we're control freaks a lot of the time, where it's like, my creative vision, I want to take that creative vision and I want to hone it myself. But then you hit a point where like, okay, well, I got to bring somebody else in. I have to bring another expert in who knows something that I don't know if I'm going to take this to another level.
Yeah.
How did you get on the same page? How did you find the people, the other pieces to the puzzle as far as developers and people who are going to fund this project? I mean, you had to get people who believed, right? And people who felt that you felt could carry on your vision in the way that you saw it.
Yeah. Sort of a couple parts to that answer, if I'm being totally heartfelt. And to be clear, I wasn't making pictures so I could make a lot of money. I was making a lot of money so I could make more art. It's very difficult for me to explain when you go from, waiting tables, and I was in massive debt from student loans and had bailed on graduate school and medical school. And again, I just caught my own career at the right time. And the area of interest for me photographically with action sports, it was becoming a thing. It wasn't a thing just years before, and it was entering the mainstream. So I rode a absolutely magical wave that had a lot to do with luck. I mean, I just turned around one day and I was, swimming in money. I couldn't spend it fast enough. And to be fair, I was investing in some traditional vehicles, but I was mostly investing in my photo studio. I had, 10 full-time employees. I didn't know any other photographer in the world that had that. Annie Leibovitz not excluded. Like, I didn't know anybody. I had a full-time video intern in 2004 and a full-time person making videos for me in 2005. And that cost money. But with all of the money that I was making taking pictures, I was just reinvesting it in what I would just say creativity. I bought a photo studio, built it out from the ground up, telling all sorts of photo stories, and had multiple producers working on jobs. We had a producer that was producing all our commercial jobs, and then we had a person who was so dedicated to producing all of our live streams and the educational stuff that we were putting out. And it was just a massive investment in innovation. And it was just very lucky and well-timed, as well as, again, that part of seeing around the corner. And so to me, working with other people who were further along in the pipeline, I would get asked to make a music video and I'd bring in someone really famous and watch them. I'm like, okay, we're co-directing, but to be clear, I'm learning everything and I'll fund the whole thing myself so that I can learn from the best in real time, essentially buying my own education. And when you're throwing that kind of dollar value into storytelling and learning, you learn very quickly and you get good at telling stories. And in turn, the storytelling, those people press the follow or like button, and that had a dramatic effect, especially early on. So the short answer is it was in my nature to learn as fast as possible. I was swimming in money that I was reinvesting at an insane rate because it was so fulfilling and it was exposing. I mean, I'm just this lower middle class kid from the suburbs.
Well, we may have to take your word for that, Chase, because you might be the only person who's had this particular experience. I mean, the rags to riches and then throwing back the money into the creative pursuit. That feedback loop, I haven't heard of anything like that happening.
I was just early. Yeah, I do think Gary Vaynerchuk in just the business universe, if you're familiar with his work, he was very, very early. And then I think that's why we became friends. And, when he was still doing wine, is because sort of game sees game. And I was like, oh, yeah, you're doing the same thing I'm doing. It's crazy, right? You just put stuff out there in the world with no expectation. And the world's like, man, this is so cool. Thank you for helping me. I'm going to help you with my follow and my support. And so you'd come up with the book and people would buy the book. You'd, put a video out in the world, or you'd launch something like Best Camera, for example. It was the app of the year on the Apple App Store. Like, it wasn't just like, oh yeah, I had a good idea. It was the app of the year. Downloads and millions of copies. And at the time it was, whatever, $3 or $4 to download each copy of the app. And so
hold on, how come we haven't heard of this app? I mean, this is app of the year
2009.
So something must have gone awry. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. The story is well chronicled on the internet. It's, all over the place, how Chase Jarvis missed out on $1 billion when essentially Instagram is a lift and stamp copy of Best Camera. We pioneered the idea of filters on a dock at the bottom of the thing. None of that existed. I had to work with the C-suite at Apple to help them understand that the future of photography was going to be a feed of images that you couldn't control because they didn't want pictures of nudity and whatnot appearing on their apps. And I helped them understand what social adjudication was, that the community could actually do the policing. When you're doing that at Apple, they recognize that, and they, helped understand that if the camera used to be the toothpick, if it was the Swiss Army knife, they were quickly realizing that the lens on that phone was the blade. It was the most important piece of that device. And as someone who was pioneering in the space, we got along well, and I helped them tell a good story, and they helped put me on global stages all over the world, the New York Times and Good Morning America and all that stuff, to talk about the future of photography. So it was successful. And the downfall, as you said in the intro, was I had a contract that was the best I could come up with at the time, and a developer that I was introduced to from a friend who was a technologist, a venture capitalist, and they built the thing to my spec, to what I wanted it to look and feel like, and that was what was successful. But app developers at the time, those weren't going to be big companies. They were apps like the lighter app and the pretend I'm chugging water app and the flashlight app. And, and they didn't think that each of those companies was going to be multi-billion-dollar mobile first companies. So our first contract said that I funded everything to get it to this particular point. They were going to fund the development. The development was about $250,000. So we're going to split the revenue 70-30 in favor of the developer until they earn their money back. And then it was going to flip. And they projected, because they already had one very successful and popular app, that it was going to take about a year. So I think 13 months was what we forecast for them to make their money back based on a successful app. And they were paid back in, I think, 6 days after launch.
Wow.
So they are on the hook to develop a new version and launch it every month for 12 months. That was in the contract. But we didn't specify the details of what that would be like, because it's hard to forecast where software is going to go in a year. You're just basically responding to the community and the needs of the application in real time. So we didn't spec out every development. Well, what we didn't see was that they were going to be paid back in 6 days, and that their desire to work for 30% of the revenue from that day forward was going to plummet. Like, they were going to go try and make another cool app, and they were going to sink their resources in there. So they would, to quote, honor the contract, release a new version in French, as opposed to do the innovative work that we had already planned out on our roadmap and that we agreed to in principle prior to then. And then in the middle of that process, again, then we are the most popular app in the App Store, millions of dollars. They are moving on, trying to replicate what they did with anybody else who will give them money, because they're also popular at that time. And all of the technical stuff was located on their servers, because it was uncustomary to have a photographer have this. It was only web development shops that had it. Well, halfway through this process, they were acquired by Deloitte. And so then it was me in a lawsuit against Deloitte. which doesn't go very well despite how happy or proud or successful I was. And yeah, it was in that window where Instagram, then previously called Bourbon, they had a photo sharing aspect of their location-based service. The only thing that was successful was the photo part. They had seen the best camera go to #1 in the App Store and all over the media, and their investors said, why don't you do more of that? $50 million later, backed by Andreessen Horowitz, they essentially lifted and stamped a copy of Best Camera and we're off to the races. And that's what that industry is like. I mean, sometimes first is painful and a fast follow is who wins. And they just out executed us when I was tied up in a legal conundrum with Deloitte, and hat tip to them. There used to be a bunch of videos of people asking Kevin Systrom, like, isn't this just a lift and stamp of Chase Jarvis's website? And those are mysteriously gone now. Robert Scoble used to have a lot of those on his site, and they're all gone now, which is kind of weird. But so there's a bunch of articles like Instagram beats Chase Jarvis to the $1 billion or whatever. And to be fair, I never really had a shot after they secured $50 million in funding and Andreessen Horowitz. And to be clear, I was the only person on my cap table, and people were throwing crazy numbers at me, and I was like still trying to wiggle my way out of this pickle with Deloitte at the time and spending my money in energy on the wrong stuff, and just got whooped by the industry that knows how to kick ass. There's a twist there. All of the things that I learned from that venture capital universe, I then lifted into my next adventure, which was Creative Live. And that panned out very differently. And we had a lot of success. We were able to help tens of millions of people there. So,
Well, I think this is probably a good time to take a short break as we break into that new era of your career. So let's stand up, stretch, shake it out. If you're already standing, have a seat, relax. And when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Chase Jarvis about his incredible photo career. Stay tuned, everybody.
We hope you're enjoying this episode of the B&H Photography Podcast. Chase had so many great ideas to share, our chat even extended into our break time, including this insight that can flip the script on the way you think about your art.
I think that's another major takeaway. It's like, you never know where your art could possibly take you. You never know where the art that you put out in the world, how much good it can do, how much help or transformation or awakening or whatever it can provide to somebody else. This is the takeaway around like, oh, I don't want to promote myself. What you're really doing is there are people out there that need your work. And you are just simply connecting them to that work. It's not about promoting. It's about helping the right people who are going to see your work and connect with it. And it's not going to be everywhere. Remember, I needed 20 people to write me a real check to make an insane living. And if you can think of it like I'm connecting my work with people who it will help.
It's a good reframe.
Yeah, it worked. It really did. It worked for me. And I couldn't possibly, I'm a pretty big dreamer, and I had no idea.
And we're back here talking with Chase Jarvis. Now, before the break, we talked about the earlier stages of your career and the Best Camera saga, and we started to move into the Creative Live era. And Chase, before we broke, you were talking about the things you learned from Best Camera app and what you applied to Creative Live. There was a learning curve in Best Camera app.
Very expensive learning.
Is that a good term for it? Should I rephrase that?
It cost me $1 billion to learn some pretty good lessons.
Oh, man. So what was the biggest thing you took from that entire Best Camera thing?
If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Interesting.
And really, I think my lack of experience as a solo entrepreneur with a small photo studio, again, about 10 people and a bunch of collaborators, businesses that are a larger function, it's the capitalization table, it's who owns the business. And as 100% owner of the business, I was paralyzed by all of the different incoming interests and people who wanted to help me, and I wanted to understand. And I was in a position where it was difficult to trust. I didn't know who to turn to. And I was so far out of my element. Again, I grew up this sort of lower middle class kid, taking pictures of him and his friends skateboarding, for example. And all of a sudden you have like $1 billion being chucked around for the valuation of photography apps, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars that are getting tossed around. And like, it was so on a different planet from what I was aware of. despite having had a bunch of success, it was like that was otherworldly. And
Yeah, there's many layers.
man, there's so many layers about that. As you said, there's what people want from you, what you want, what is right, what is, right with a small r, what is right with a capital R. I was ill-equipped. And yet I learned a lot that I was able to leverage into other areas of my life. And I use leverage in a really heartfelt way. I think leverage sounds acerbic and toxic, but all it is applying a little bit of leverage in the right place, like literally with a lever and getting an extraordinary advantage. So once you have experienced some of those things that I experienced in that best camera process, like talking to venture capitalists and believing that I was actually worthy of the best entrepreneurs in the world, were building technology, and I could do that alongside them or in their shadow or learn from them. Or, we had many of the best venture capital firms in the world seek to invest in Creative Live, people who built Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Uber, all of these apps that now are commonplace. They all wanted to invest. And so I was privy to a lot of really, really smart, talented people that helped me apply the knowledge that I had learned from the best camera experience into a new chapter with Creative Live. And so for people who don't know, we founded in 2010. It was the first live streaming learning platform. There wasn't anything about creativity really. Lynda.com existed, but was mostly CDs. You would fly to New York and stay in a hotel and learn from a master photographer that would cost you $5,000. We put that on the internet, broadcast it live. Anyone in the world could watch for free. And only if you wanted to save the recording and watch it again on your own time did you have to pay for it. And that very innovative business model became very popular very quickly. Our first class with Vince LaFerre had 50,000 people in it. Our second was Zach Arias, had 100,000 people in it. And our third, just 4 months into the business, with Jasmine Star, was the first live broadcast wedding on the internet. Had 150,000 people tuned in real time, learning from all over the world.
Sheesh.
Yeah. And so we realized we had a tiger by the tail. And again, that was largely launched on the back of having delivered a lot of value to millions of photographers through my apps. And, I was writing every day on a blog and social stuff early on. Like that seeded essentially the roots of what was going to become a very successful and innovative learning platform that went on to serve tens of millions of people and make hundreds of millions of dollars, and was acquired by a large public company called Fiverr in 2021 at sort of the peak of the pandemic, when people were realizing that, this online learning thing, turns out it's pretty important. It just took them 10 years. It took everybody 10 years to figure that out. And that's another curse of the entrepreneur, right?
I wonder if we can just talk a little bit about the inception of Creative Live and your thinking at that time. Was it something like lynda.com that cottoned you on to this way of education over the internet?
Yeah, like the pivot, because it wasn't like Best Camera app was an educational app.
No,
so
it was the first
pivot
live photo feed. You could see photos from all over the world. I was very aware that the data that was behind the imagery, for example, we launched in 2009, the Best Camera app. It was millions of downloads, and it was on New Year's Eve of 2009. I was watching images of people taking them all over the world and posting them in real time, and I was seeing that, oh my gosh, what's happening in Berlin, what's happening in Tokyo, what's happening in Africa, and that I could see this concept of a real-time photo feed and actually the data behind it. Trends, why is green showing up so much in this time of the year in this place, and fashion in New York. And you could just see all of these trends globally because we had sort of like a God view of the data. And it was transformational for me, for example. And so it was ideas like that I learned from the Best Camera, that when you lifted and stamped it into, it wasn't like I looked at lynda.com. I was taking pictures and pointed a live stream at my photography set as I was walking around, working with my assistants and the band, and that people were coming out of the woodwork, 25,000 people asking questions at the same time. I was like, I can help these people learn in real time. Why are you doing this? Well, why did you move that light? And I was just talking to the camera in real time, and it was so effective at A, teaching, and B, learning, that I was like, oh, this is a thing. And my co-founder, at the time, he was working on webinars because those were emerging, but that was basically just a broadcast of your desktop.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was actually the IT support that I had hired to manage terabytes of data. And for a long time, I had the gold standard backup protocol, videos like 1, 2, 3, and 4 on Google search rank for how to, backup photos and videos. And so I had essentially a full-time firm whose job it was to manage.
To serve that data because there was no YouTube.
Exactly. There was no YouTube. There was no such thing as cloud storage. I had, $200,000 server racks in my studio that were constantly needing to be upgraded. It was like literally a full-time job. So I was paying this particular contractor at the time who would become my co-founder, who was trying to teach people online through the webinar platform. And I was like, man, you're doing that. I'm doing this. I mean, a bunch of my friends are the best photographers in the world. Maybe we can get them to do a thing. Wouldn't that be cool? See earlier point about the numbers that we were making just right out of the gate. And so it was fun to figure out that you had a tiger by the tail. We were aware of Linda, but that was DVDs largely. And we realized that having this very innovative business model that anyone in the world could watch for free while we were recording it, because the classes were 10 hours long, right? You couldn't basically sit there because people have jobs and kids and, and stuff. But holy smokes, this is, the best in the world, or the Pulitzer Prize winner who's telling you all of their secrets in real time. I want to watch this again when I get home or whatever. So they would press the buy button. Then that ultimately created a very large library with thousands of classes and billions of minutes streamed and thousands of the world's top instructors. We expanded that beyond photography to include entrepreneurship, had people like, Mark Cuban and Richard Branson, and basically expanded that into photography, design, filmmaking, and entrepreneurship over the course of a handful of years that helped the platform grow.
I keep thinking back to earlier in our conversation, you mentioned, when you first started capturing video of you walking around, and behind the scenes didn't exist yet.
Yeah.
But basically Creative Live sort of formalized the behind the scenes process.
Yes. I think you're right to glom onto that, Jill, because that was the thing that was most interesting to many of the top investors in the world. They're like, this is a new form of learning, to be able to see the sausage being made and to ask the person who's making that sausage a question in real time.
Mm-hmm.
From anywhere in the world. You're sitting at home in your underwear. You don't have to get on a plane and fly to New York to sit in a seminar. You're sitting at home in your underwear watching the best in the world. And because it was live and there was chat, and we had people who would surface interesting questions and present them to, hey, fill in the blank teacher who's like, why are you doing this right now? Blah, blah. Sandy from Tuscaloosa, Alabama wants to know. And if you were Sandy, you were absolutely blown away that this Pulitzer Prize winning photographer you've idolized your whole life is actually talking to you while you're sitting at home in your underwear. And if you're everybody else, you're like, oh my God, I can have my question answered. You get to see that magic, and you want to sort of poke the machine and have the machine respond. So investors from all over the world saw that and were like, this is the future. This is a real deal. That also was interesting because then when we had offers to buy the company, probably call it 15 months into existence, for never work again, private jet money. And again, I had had a certain amount of success with my photo app and with photography. And I was like, well, if we get people throwing this much money at us out of the gate, let's just let this one ride and see what kind of impact we can create, because we're just getting started. And it was the best camera experience that helped us navigate that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you never understand that massive failure, because it should be seen as a massive public failure to be the app in the App Store. And while I could have parted ways with it from Flickr or Yahoo or some of these other folks that wanted to buy it later on, also for big sums of money, but I didn't want to go join those companies, which was required. And that was what I was like, no, man, I'm an artist. I'm no suit, and I don't know what that would be like. So I'm happy to just not take the money and go learn. But it was that experience of sort of navigating.
Yeah, this all feels like the Social Network movie.
Totally. It's like, it's scary and it's so true. And that is how that Silicon Valley works, right? It's so
The
weird.
whole movie, it was just like pins and needles. It's like these sums of money.
Oh,
What do do you take
totally.
it? Do you go for
Yeah,
it? Do you-
absolutely. And all of the nefarious actors, they're all there. All of the people who truly see you for what it is and what you want, and you're trying to distinguish them. It was very much like that. There's a great HBO series called Silicon Valley.
Mhm.
And my wife couldn't watch that because it was all so real for us. We were like living those things, and she was like, "Oh my God, this is exactly what happened."
Yeah, nerve-wracking.
Yeah, totally. It would make her sick to her stomach. But and that cuts both ways, to be fair, right? There's some really interesting, fascinating, and cool things about that, and there's horrible, heartbreaking, gut-wrenching experiences that come out of that. And it really isn't for the faint of heart. Like, it was interesting. How do you fight for the thing that you love more than anything that you built and it helps millions of people? And at what point is it enough? And at what point do you not want it to be in the wrong hands? And all of those things are real questions. And I wouldn't have traded it for anything, but you never know that your biggest failure can actually be the lever to help you transform a sector of education. And that all came out of Best Camera, that massive failure. And you can read in detail about that if you want to on the internet. It's just, there's plenty written on it. But if I had not had that massive and very public failure, Creative Live would not have reached, that number of people or had that impact or help, invent or transform an industry. No way.
I'm interested early on when you guys were developing the idea for Creative Live and getting it out there to investors, the idea of free education. Did you have to sell investors on, like, why are we giving away this stuff? Or was that an internal conversation? I mean, I think it's an interesting dynamic to look at. Over the years, it was like, we remember paying a couple $100 for Adobe Suite. And now we're in a subscription-based economy where everything's completely changed in a number of decades. But when you guys were first starting this, was free education, was that something that you guys thought to monetize in more of a way? What were the internal conversations like at the time?
When people think about company values, mostly people think of those goofy posters with some stuff written on the wall, like vision and, stupid words. And yet access was one of our values at Creative Live, and we treated our values very seriously. Creativity, access, and community were our first 3 of 7 values. And what that meant to us was that we were actually making decisions through the lens of those values. For example, when you have, let's say, 10,000 people watching a live broadcast and 1,000 people decide to buy it, and you're an investor and you don't understand some of these early dynamics and economics because e-commerce and all this stuff was still very new, you're like, wait a minute, we're leaving 9,000 buyers on the table. And we were like, no, actually access to the world's top creative instructors. That's one of our promises. That's what we stand for. So we're happy with the conversion rate of 10% because it was off the charts relative to other e-commerce, even Amazon at the time. And it was mind-bending to have these values on the wall to truly guide the decision-making. That's why they're there. They guide who you hire, why you would fire, what decisions you're going to make, and how you place community in the order of all of the different business and profits and losses and all that stuff. So I think investors found it fascinating. And part of what we said is, no, this is actually why people care, because we truly are helping people who can't afford it learn from their kitchen counter in every corner of the globe. And that was simultaneously compelling for them and maddening. And it wasn't without friction, for sure, because again, if you're leaving 90% of the upside on the table and your job as a venture capitalist is to make the next $1 billion company, it was very, I don't want to pretend that they had no idea, but it was still early enough in the concept of community on the internet that it's certainly a very heated discussion about what were we doing and was it the right way of doing it. So there was simultaneously a smart, warm-hearted,
altruistic.
Yeah, there was certainly some of that at play. And there was also a good and interesting business model that we were pioneering at the time, that now the concept of a freemium, there's even a freaking name for it. There really wasn't a name for that back then. We were part of the early internet companies that define that as an actual business model where you give it away and then a certain cross-section of the customer base buys it.
It's a great model, especially if you're doing a 10-hour course,
Totally. Yeah, it was totally innovative. If you all saw the messages, like thousands of messages for every class from all over the world, like I can't believe I'm learning for free.
This broke creative right here is thanking you. I can personally thank you. I was an early adopter.
Part of that, then you know.
And I think, and again, coming from somebody who was an end user, it was that accessibility. I love to hear from the person who co-founded it that accessibility was the goal, because that's what we want to hear. You don't want to, it's like, oh, this was to make a buck, or was to ultimately, bait and switch, get them in and then charge them later. No. And I think that's what makes it so beautiful, is because me as the end user was on there because of the accessibility.
Yeah. You're like, oh my goodness, how is this possible? And we
Nothing's
were like,
free.
Hey, we can actually make a business. If enough people care, then there are enough people who are more than happy to support the community, to pay $100 to be able to watch it over and over, to whatever, fill in the blanks. It's like, that's the real deal.
And getting the best of the best. Because normally I think we become accustomed to, well, you can get the advice from Jim down the street for free, but if you want to pay for Richard Branson, then it's going to cost.
I'm curious about what the most popular offerings you had were. Was it the big name people, or was there other algorithms in there that made certain things that you wouldn't expect popular?
I was surprised by a lot of things. I would say that the fundamentals of a lot of the different, we had photography, filmmaking, design. The fundamentals were people going from 0 to 1. Again, early internet, people like, oh my gosh, you mean I can learn on the internet and then put a business on the internet and ditch my corporate gig or whatever? That was still very much a piece of the mindset. So the fundamentals always did so well. And of course, the big classes would draw a lot of new people to the platform. I remember Tim Ferriss is a dear friend of mine, and he wrote The 4-Hour Workweek, The 4-Hour Body, just a legendary entrepreneur and thought leader, truly in that sense, like pioneered this idea of not sitting at a desk 9 to 5, and he did that in 2006. He was writing about stuff like that. So when he would teach classes, or, Sir Richard or Mark Cuban would be on the podcast, and we would do that kind of stuff live, like they were bringing a lot of people to the table. But the things that really paid were consistently the fundamentals, because those were classes that never got a style. And the business of these things, because this is, again, people wanted to make a living and a life of their choosing on the internet. You could squint and see that at that point in time. Now, of course, we take it for granted and it's obvious, but even just 15 years ago, that was like, oh my gosh, this is my dream come true. So a lot of the business classes, and we emphasized that stuff early on. It's like every one of our early photography classes are like, hey, Vince, how do you make money? Tell the universe how you make money. And then people are, ferociously devouring everything, because that were some of the biggest secrets beyond just the craft and the technique, right?
How do you see what you started? Because creative education wasn't really a widespread thing. And for me, at least, Creative Live was what brought it to the masses. Now, where it's gone, I mean, I want to say it's been pretty recent. Pandemic era is when I think a lot of people, by and large, started taking hold of like, oh, wow, hey, we could utilize the internet. Whereas you guys were doing it a full decade before. Does it still carry the same strength? Is it stronger? How do you see the current state of online education in comparison to where you introduced it to the masses?
Yeah, I feel like it is way more broadly accepted. This is a great vehicle to learn. It was somewhat controversial. Like, can you really do it? I remember, even pre-pandemic, people would say, oh, well, you can learn a lot of things, but you can't learn things like architecture. You need to learn that in person. And then, of course, the pandemic happens, and lo and behold, architecture classes are online. They figured it out. And then also there's a value in being in person. I'd be remiss not to mention that part of the magic of Creative Live is that we would have an in-studio audience. People from all over the world show up to sit in there with the teachers. And so the teachers had someone to teach, and that they could essentially represent the internet, because if one of us has a question, probably a lot of us have a question. So, there was an IRL capacity to it, which I think was certainly transformative. And that was a part of our model that others did not have. And it was a key differentiator for us. It certainly helped put on the map this idea that great stuff can come from the internet and that we are sort of all in this together. It's this sort of community over competition. There was sort of a punk rock DIY ethos straight up that I got from punk rock, from skateboarding culture that I was a part of. And that was something that I was pretty passionate about, having a front row seat to what it is that we were making. I think the fact that YouTube is so mature and that they have created a business model where creators can actually make a living and a life has opened up the floodgates considerably and taken sort of our early foray into the space and put it on steroids. And I know the economics behind all of those online learning platforms that are there that started after us. The master classes and the Coursera's were about the same time. And I know just enough about those to be dangerous and to know that, man, it is a big business because acquiring new customers, and it is like, it's sort of social network level aggressiveness in order to make those businesses work today at scale. It's nothing to sneeze at. There's a reason that we've had hundreds of employees at Creative Live, for example. Now you go to those companies that are public now, Coursera, thousands of employees, and you're like, that's a real, a big business. That, to be fair, if that's the arc of it, it's not interesting to me to run a business at that world. And that's part of the reasons that we ended up being acquired and sort of didn't take that route, weren't able to. There's a bunch of very complicated esoteric stuff that I won't bore the listeners with. I chronicled this in my latest book, which is called Never Play It Safe. I tell a story about one of my investors. We were doing $36 million a year in revenue and growing 40% year over year. And I was pretty excited about it because I'd come back as the CEO to turn around after a different CEO had struggled a little bit. And I was so proud. And I remember after a meeting, sharing those numbers, and it's like, we should go raise another round and really we'll go public after this next round. And he's like, Chase, I got to tell you something. It's just not that interesting. And and you're like, oh, so wait a minute, $36 million run rate going 40% year over year, not that interesting. And I don't mean to be depressing or anything, but that's the scale that venture capital expects. If you need to be growing, you need to be doubling every year. And at that rate, they'll just back a dump truck full of money up. Their goal is to get 100 or 1,000x return on their money. And that's fine. That
Move quickly and break things.
Yeah. And they don't want a successful couple $100 million company. That's literally not interesting to them by definition. So that part of the equation, it's not for the weak of heart if you don't understand those things. And honestly, I wasn't interested in that. And that was at the point where I was like, okay, expectations are not aligned. We're going to be open for acquisition. Fiverr came along and bought us in 2021. I did a little bit of time with them to see the transition and was very happy to move on and do something different, which is what I'm working on now, a bunch of other stuff. Writing books and helping the world understand that it's a very creative place.
That it is. I mean, really, I love this idea that you've mentioned a couple times already, seen around the corner. And it's like, it makes me think, because, Jill, Mike, and I were talking, and it's like, everyone's trying to come up with the next big thing. Everyone's trying to forecast the direction of where are we going to go from here? Are we over Instagram? TikTok's dead. Well, TikTok's back. Where are we going to go next? As somebody who's been at the forefront of kind of staying ahead of the game,
yeah.
What's the landscape like right now? Are we kind of just in a lull? Is someone going to come and just blindside everybody, or?
I'm disheartened by social media because of all of the reasons that everybody else is. And I'll be transparent. I know people that do that for a living and make millions of dollars and hate it. So I don't see a lot of interesting things on the horizon for social media generally. I see sort of a reckoning, but I do see just boundless creativity and the ability to communicate. And I see creators leveraging AI to become superhuman in their ability to create and at a pace that we previously thought was unimaginable. And so I'm hopeful and eager. I'm working on a couple of startups at the intersection of creativity and AI that I'll have more to say. Maybe you guys can have me back on the show when it's time to talk about
Mike
those.
was waiting for you to open that AI door right there.
Really.
Yeah,
we were going to start. I was like, no, then it'll just be an AI conversation.
I know. I'm glad we're covering it here toward the last chapter of the show. But I do believe deeply in our ability to harness that in some capacity for the creative class, the creative community. It's not going to be without peril. And there are a lot of folks that do not see this coming. It's going to come way faster and way bigger, way harder than I think 95% of the world sees. And so there's going to be a lot of reconciliation that have to happen. But, in the meantime, I love telling stories and helping people understand that all the best stuff in life is on the other side of your comfort zone. I think that's the thing that I got good at and afforded me a lot of opportunity, was being comfortable, being uncomfortable. That's, essentially the message of my book, Never Play It Safe, which just came out in October. And yeah, I'm still building. I've vowed to not operate all of these companies. I'm going to do my part, but do it at a safe distance and use that vision or my willingness to experiment or take risks in, I think, helpful way. I don't need to relive the Social Network movie anymore. I'm good. I want to just keep taking pictures, and I believe deeply in the human spirit, deeply in creativity and the ability to create a living and a life that we love. I think it's our birthright, and I'm just, happy to be a member of the community who's continuing to try.
Are you living life more offline these days?
Yeah, I think after the company was acquired in 2021, I rested. I didn't realize how tired I was. And I definitely needed rest. I handed over the keys and then was on the executive team there at Fiverr for essentially just short of a year. And I was like, oh, it's September. I'm going to chill out through the holidays and then get started on my next endeavors. And then January came and went, and then June came and went. And all of a sudden it was holiday season again. But it took time for me to heal or rest after that. It's a very damaging and stressful ride, especially when you're doing things that are not in line with your values necessarily. See the point about being a publicly traded executive for some period of time. Like, that's just not my jam. And yet I agreed to do that because it was the best outcome for Creative Live, for the team that built it and investors that invested in it. And yet, it was not my cup of tea. And sometimes we have to willingly do things that we don't love in order for the best possible good. But I rested, and slowly but surely, man, that spark is still there, and now cherishing it and nourishing it and helping other people find it. That's why I get up in the morning.
Now, Chase, you mentioned that seeing around the corner with regards to artificial intelligence and large language models leads you to believe that they might be a bigger disruptor than some people understand.
Yes.
And I'm 100% in agreement with that thinking. So, what do you think the next half decade may look like in terms of AI capabilities and what that means, to society? And let's just stick with in terms of employment.
Sure. At the World Economic Forum, the CEO of Anthropic said the following: by 2026, I think he said 2026 or 2027, we will have AI systems that are better than most people at most things.
Right, I heard that. Yeah.
Wow.
So just grok that for a second. Better than most people at most things. PhD levels in anything you can imagine, available at the fingertips. And I mean, even just the agent concept. I don't know if you heard about that. OpenAI announced an agent, which is now you can give the agent instructions that are multiple dimension. Like, it can do research in this app and then create models in this app and bring them all together and assemble.
We used it to create a couple questions for you today, Chase.
There you go. Awesome. What people don't understand is, when I look on the horizon and where they're going to get steamrolled, is this idea of what exponential growth looks like in a model like that. And I would say, if you can make it up in your head what will be possible right now, that's what it's going to, like, I'm not even kidding. It's like, whatever sounds absurd to you, if you can make it up and say it out loud, that's probably going to be available to you. And that is simultaneously empowering and exciting and terrifying. So what does that mean to someone who's listening right now? What they're listening, they should be thinking, okay, so if AI is great at going from 1 to 100 in anything, I can give it a task and it can run the marathon, where's it going to be its weakest? And the answer is from 0 to 1. It's from taking that idea that's buried deep in your heart and your head and taking it from not existing to existing. And the cool thing is that this is actually uniquely human. What we're gifted at doing, is this 0 to 1. So I would way over index on that photograph, that painting, that company, that written thing that you want to get out of your head and your heart, out into the world, and then letting, machine systems and you plus AI take it to infinity. Like, that's interesting. So let's get really good at one-on-one. And the cool thing is that's very much what we were put on this planet to do. It's one of the things that differentiates us from all the other species. So this is a full circle moment, right? The thing that made you weird as a kid is going to make you a great entrepreneur or creator in this next chapter with AI at your back, assuming you can process what we're talking about here.
The spark, the inception, the idea, the emotional connection of an idea to your own feelings, like all of that stuff is off the table for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
I think having the assistance of PhD level and by the way, an infinite number of these PhD level artificial intelligence agents can help you achieve the 1 to the 100, but they can't do the first thing for you.
Very true.
AI is too logical for what's going on in my brain. No one can recreate the madness that's going on up there. So I think I'm safe.
I mean, lean into it. That's what I mean. The magic that is you, unmistakably, unapologetically, that weird stuff that you got in your backpack. Like, that's what we want to see.
Mm-hmm. I love this. I mean, a great conversation. Chase, I kind of want to wrap this whole thing up by talking about the idea of success. You have lived it. You have followed your passions. You've broke outside the mold. You've created your own path. At this stage of your life, what does success mean to you, and what does it mean for you going forward?
I'm really chasing simple. I think there's something that's so elegant and simple design, simple life, simple economics, simple connection. I like simplicity, and it sounds, it's very difficult. What's that? Jim Carrey's like, I think everyone should get rich and famous so you can find out that it's not that. And then, what I joked about in my book and what I believe is true, it's like, I was like, well, I tell you what, I'm going to try, and then I'll figure that out. You make me rich and famous, then I'll tell you what I think, and then we'll reconcile after that. People are not willing to really hear that feedback. And I think for good reason. These are the products of late stage Western capitalism that we're in right now. And, it's very effective and efficient in a lot of things. And yet this concept of fulfillment, of purpose, of meaning is, I think, bigger and more powerful now than ever before, specifically in the face of all the things that we see out there in the world. I think the downfall and the negative aspects of social media are going to play out. And if we just apply those, just the basic, what everyone would assume is true with that, which the science is really going to show that it's way worse for us than we think, and way worse for kids, and way worse for all that stuff. It's like, cool. Well, what's the opposite of that? What is connection and humanity and all those things that we have sort of taken for granted until some of the experiments went poorly? Like, let's get back to that. And so I believe deeply in our ability to remedy and to right the ship and connect. It's not going to be linear and it's not going to be easy, but at our core, I believe deeply in our humanity to keep us connected, and our creativity to make the world safer, sweeter, smarter, more important, impactful place.
And never play it safe.
And yeah, it is a good book. I'm not going to lie. I poured my heart out, and that's what these dark circles under my eyes are from. You can't see it right now, but my hope is that my book, Never Play It Safe. The subhead is A Practical Guide to Freedom, Creativity, and a Life You Love. I hope that is worth tuning into for some of the listeners today. And thanks again for having me on the show, y'all. You're good at this job, and it's fun to listen. It's a great show, great program. A lot of respect to you all and to B&H, and thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you, Chase. It's been great speaking with you.
Thanks a lot, Chase.
Awesome.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us today, Chase. That was an incredibly inspiring conversation, and I know our listeners are going to feel the same. And if you are a fan of the show but are not yet a subscriber, head on over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, B&H's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts, and please click subscribe. You can also find us on the Explora blog, where we post photos from our guests along with our show notes. And please join us on Facebook at the B&H Photography Podcast group, where you can share your favorite photos and comments about the show. I'm your host, Derek Fosbender. Jill Waterman is our creative producer. Episodes are recorded, mixed, and edited by technical producer Mike Weinstein, and our executive producer is Richard Stevens. On behalf of us all, thank you so much for tuning in today.